So, looking at the second movement of Schumann's fantasy pieces, one of the first things that I think is quite interesting is the use of the seventh as an expressive device in this particular movement. Sometimes Schumann uses the octave, which you saw in the first movement, and even larger intervals like the 10th. But in this particular movement, there's something quite telling about this use of the seventh. It's slightly more dissonant than the octave, of course, and you can see it here in the places that I've just highlighted. We've got this E in the bass and the piano at the very, very beginning, and the D, the first main note that you have in the melody, and then the clarinet replicates this with its G to F, and you can see these intervals, they're not quite the octave. So this interval again that's expressive here in the clarinet, we've got a ninth. So they're intervals that are just either side of the octave. Octaves are always expressive. If you think of singing, whenever you're trying to sing an octave, it's a large interval, and it creates a heightened sense of intensity emotionally. So here Schumann is trying to pull on something that's just a little bit more resonant, a little bit more expressive, a little bit more kind of painful, even though this is a more light-hearted movement. You can see lebhaft, leicht means lively and light, so you might say allegro, leggero if you're doing it in Italian. And as I've said in referencing the first movement, Schumann has this particular expressive marking, which you see here in the piano part, and then repeated in the clarinet part. This is where Schumann has shown you that he wants to sort of, almost like, if you can imagine where you would use vibrato if you were playing, say, a stringed instrument, or perhaps even the flute or oboe. And we don't tend to use vibrato quite so frequently on the clarinet. And of course you can't do vibrato on the piano. So he's sort of highlighting the places of most expressive interest in this melody. The other thing that gives character to this second movement is a continuation of this feeling of 2 against 3, this sort of rocking kind of figure. So if you look here and here, we've got this this sort of 2 against 3 figure. All the way through, and in the clarinet part, so where you've got triplets here in the piano, and we have duplets effectively going against that. And that's a feature. It creates always this sort of sense of jostling, if you like, a sense of instability or unease. So even though this movement, as I say, has a more light-hearted feel to it, there's still some kind of uneasiness. There's a sense of something underneath the surface, if you like, given that the piano part is mainly creating, or providing rather, the underlay to the melodic line. I mean, many times you'll see what's actually happening is that the right hand, the top notes are being picked out by the little finger of the right hand in the melody. So we have this, the melody is clearly marked here. But then we've got, with that, he's woven in this sort of slightly kind of uneasy, shifting, flowing underlay. So looking in its relationship to the first movement is in A minor, and this goes to the tonic major. So as you can see, we're in A major, we have a key signature of 3 sharps. And we've still got a little bit of the chromatic interplay. There are places, if you look here in the bass line, G sharp, A, B, B sharp, C sharp. So there is always this way of it being expressive, and it's kind of sliding between the notes. This sort of chromatic writing, even though the clarinet part is much more wide ranging with these large intervals of the 7ths and the 9ths. There is still this kind of romantic period chromaticism that's kind of sinuously kind of flowing underneath. One of the other things that the clarinet part has that's interesting is this sort of this echo figure. There's a lot of imitation in Schumann's fantasy pieces and in a lot of romantic music, full stop. But we have this this figure where we have this ta-dee-dum here, which is then echoed with ta-dee-dee-dee-dee in this softer pianissimo dynamic. And as you can see, it's a regular feature in this movement. So it's again, this idea with fantasy pieces is that, what is the fantasy? What's it all about? It's to do with the imagination. It's to do with dreams and nightmares and poetry. And Schumann isn't prescriptive. He doesn't say what the fantasy is. He gives us actually very little concrete information. Some composers, composers of tone poems, might actually give their movements titles, or give the whole piece some kind of title, like nymphs, or something to do with a river, or dreams, or angels, things like that. But Schumann doesn't do that. He leaves it literally to our imagination, both as the interpreter of the music, but also as the listener. There's no specific program involved. So this sort of seething piano part, if you like, gently rocking over the top, underneath of this clarinet line, is in contrast to the quite sort of brooding first movement that we had that was in A minor. And interestingly, again, Schumann counterpoints the key of A, this time A major, again with another really clever and beautiful F major section here. So you can see we've moved into F major, and we have this very cheeky mood that comes upon us. So having been quite sort of light, but with a sort of a slightly troubling undertone, we move into something that is really, really quite sort of ebullient and playful. This chromatic scurrying figure in the clarinet that opens the middle section, the B section, which again is imitated and answered by the piano, and so on. So we have this sort of game of cat and mouse as we go up, and then we come back down the other side as we're scurrying up with the ti da da di da da di, and so we go on again, this time with the piano leading. So it really is a kind of a game of hide and seek. And again, the counterpoint to this is we go from F into C. So here you can see we've kind of got our we've still got the same key signature, but we're kind of like, we're sort of shifting through. We've got a C as a focus here. And our seventh returns, if you look at that bit at the top here, Ti-ya-da-da-dee-dee-dee-dee, chromaticism, Ti-ya-da-dee, ta-dee-ya-dum. That's feels to me like a real reference back to the first movement, the Ti-ya-da-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dum. So that's where the relationship is continuing through. So even though we're in a more sort of boisterous, even sort of heroic, there's a real sense of confidence in this, the second half of the B section. And this ending here, we're in forte, and it really feels like it's the wind is in your sails and is carrying you forwards. And then we have this return to F major, and this very clever, so the A that we have here is just drops down by a semitone, and the G sharp and this D with this seventh that we have here and returns as we go back to the A section. It's really clever. It just kind of feels like it's just sort of everything's just pivoting, and as you rush up to a top, you just the balance you just lose your balance, and then you tumble into the next section. Very, very skillfully done. Very, very clever. So our A section returns, and we have this. Finally, we do have the octave realization. Ti-ya-dee-dim, pa-da-dee-dee-dum. So we finally have that octave that we've been playing around with. We haven't quite managed the octave, and there it is. And just as we go into this coda, we had a coda, of course, before in the first movement. This is a very short little tagged on ending to kind of wind up the movement. And because this is going to segue or attacker into the third movement again with literally no break, we have this figure here which is just like, it's kind of, I always think it's a little bit like, and so now to bed, and you had your fun, children, and you've been playing cat and mouse, and it's right now we're going to sort of have a little bit of a lullaby. Ta-dee-do-dim, po-do-dee-dom-be-dom, ti-ta-do-dee, now time for bed. This figure repeats a few times, and then in augmentation, tam-ta-dee-dee-dom. So just showing the nice open fifths, the open notes here. G and C in the clarinet part, and then that little scurrying little rush as the children rush into bed. And again, rather like the first movement, we have these this interesting little spread chords that just flip, flip, that just finish the movement off. It's a nice little device that kind of just sort of adds our full stop to what has been quite a fun, childlike, playful interlude. And then we go on to our third movement.